listener production.
Hey, Chris Spear with you. Welcome to The Briefing. What do young Aussies and people living outside the big cities have in common? Well, according to new research, it's a distrust in government.
You don't want to end up like the US or the UK where there are really significant challenges to democracy. I think we still have something to be proud of here, but it's urgent work to keep renewing democracy.
That deep dive with our newly appointed High Commissioner to the UK into why some Aussies are losing faith in our system and how those in power can get them back is coming up in the second half of this episode. First, though, let's get into the headlines with Sasha Barbagat. It's Wednesday, the 12th of November.
Hello, Chris, and to you listening. A highly anticipated meeting of the Liberal Party will happen today in Canberra with MPs to decide whether they should dump net zero targets. Now, after months of pressure, today is expected to be a massive test of Susan Lee's leadership as she faces a potential revolt from her front bench if the climate goal is axed. Now, word is the opposition leader is expected to side with her Conservative colleagues who want to walk away from the net zero policy amid claims it's become toxic politically and it could stop the coalition from opposing some of Labor's energy policies. Now, a number of moderate Liberals have threatened to quit the front bench, though, if that happens, Chris.
Yes, and these are the same MPs that helped Lee get into the top job in the first place not too long ago. Now, the shadow cabinet will meet tomorrow to ratify today's decision ahead of a coalition party room meeting on Sunday, which will see the Libs and Nationals come together to discuss their joint position. A reminder, the Nats have already said they will walk away from the emission targets agreed to in 2015 as part of the UN's Paris Agreement.
Yeah, interesting the fact that Lee looks like she's going to side with the Conservatives on this issue. There had been, she's never actually publicly made it clear what her position on net zero is, just in general, without this, shadow of political football over the top of it. And that's what's annoyed some of the moderates. And they're saying, well, she's lacking leadership on this issue. She hasn't come out and given her stance on it. Yeah,
well, to be fair, she kind of said that this area, like most policy areas, are up for review post thumping election defeat. She kind of said this isn't exempt from our review and we're going to wait and we're going to follow all the thorough processes. But arguably, this is something that, has some urgency now. And yeah, to your point and to those moderates' point, she should be making it very clear as leader where she stands on this.
Well, one of the options they're looking at is apparently rebranding net zero. Again, the fact that this is a discussion 10 years after the UN Paris Agreement was signed is simply outrageous. What a waste of time and energy and resources. Essentially saying it's become toxic and they don't want to be associated with the term net zero. It's a fact. It's not a term. It's not an opinion. It's net zero emissions. Like, the idea of rebranding it and having to go through that just seems silly at this point. Look, quickly as well, it remains to be seen if there will be a subsequent leadership spill. We have talked about that this week. Andrew Hastie was thrown around as a potential person who could tilt for the leadership. Yeah. Also, Angus Taylor, who's the Shadow Minister for Defence. He hasn't ruled out a challenge when asked. But, it was that tricky journalist question of, are you going to make a challenge? And he said, well, we don't have plans to, which is pretty vague. So all will be revealed this week. Let's wait and see.
The governments of two states will introduce new laws cracking down on protest and protesters as the issue continues to dominate headlines. The Victorian government will table legislation today seeking to ban flags or logos used by terrorist organisations and the use of attachment devices, so things like glue, ropes or locks at protest. These behaviours have been seen at some recent high-profile rallies over immigration, the war in Gaza and climate change. Now, these new laws will also look to give police more powers to ask protesters they reasonably believe have or will commit a crime to remove their masks or face fines of more than $1,000. Now, masks and face coverings have been particularly prevalent at neo-Nazi rallies, with many criticising their ability to remain anonymous.
Yeah, Premier Jacinta Allen had initially promised a full ban on face coverings at rallies, but she then admitted she had to settle for watered-down powers that would get through the parliament.
What I'm focused on is the outcome, and the outcome here is putting into the parliament legislation that can be enacted, legislation that can be enforced, and legislation that builds on the existing powers we have already given to Victoria Police.
She says the new laws, if passed, will make it easier to identify offenders, but the police union says it doesn't think it'll make any difference and they should be called the Pretty Please Bill. Now, Wayne Gatt, who's the Police Association Victoria secretary, put out a written statement and he said, imagine going up to 100 people wearing black balaclavas and asking them one by one whether they have a lawful excuse for wearing them, which is a fair point.
Yeah, and meanwhile, the New South Wales Premier Chris Minns says his government will also introduce fresh laws that could expand a ban on Nazi symbols to include chants and slogans. It's after a Hitler Youth chant was reportedly used at Saturday's rally by neo-Nazis outside Parliament. The new laws would also give police more powers to stop specific protests outside places of worship, and this comes a month after the state Supreme Court blocked the government from giving police expanded powers to move on protesters who were in or near places of worship, regardless of what that protest was about. So it was this all-encompassing power. The court at the time said it illegally burdened the freedom of political communication.
Yeah, but the bill expected to be tabled next week will actually narrow in on the laws that the Supreme Court struck down. So what will be different is that this new legislation won't extend to peaceful protests as those earlier ones did. It'll rather focus in on those which intentionally block, harass or intimidate others from accessing places of worship.
A WA man has gone toe-to-toe with a suspected great white shark and lived to tell the tale. The windsurfer was at a popular surf spot in Margaret River on Monday when the animal took a bite out of his board.
Yeah, I fell onto it. It was wrapped around me. You've got two leashes. You've got a leash around your waist and on your wrist. And it was like in me, and I was like punching it. I had my sail, and I jumped up onto the sail just to get out of the water.
Oh my goodness.
And then I started yelling.
Wow, I'm so glad you're okay.
Yes. I'm good. I live to tell the story.
You won't sleep much tonight,
I don't think I will for a week.
That was Andy McDonald speaking about his ordeal in a video uploaded to Augusta River Mail's Facebook page. As you can hear, pretty casual about it all.
Yeah, he was shirtless, wrapped in a towel at his waist. He was like hitching his board onto the back of his truck. You could see the huge bite taken out of his board and he's just like, oh yeah, bloody hell, mate. You got to love, all the comments were like, oh, what a local legend he is. Luckily for Andy, in this moment in the water, he had a mate nearby and they helped him get back to shore. And if you were wondering, the ordeal has not scared him from the water. Andy has told the media he plans to hit the surf again within the next couple of days.
How much do you reckon we've paid in taxes to cover the airfares, office spaces, private cars, petrol and phone bills of our former Prime Ministers this year? Well, it turns out to be almost $1.4 million, according to the latest data from the Independent Parliamentary Expenses Authority, with Malcolm Turnbull leading the pack, claiming nearly $326,000 in expenses since January this year, with the bulk of it covering his office facilities, just under $295,000, and $1,000 in accident insurance excess fees when his government car was sideswiped by another driver.
Now, coming in second on this list was John Howard. He claimed around $260,000. Again, the bulk of it was on his office. Julia Gillard was the lowest claiming former PM out of this list of 7. She claimed just over $96,000. $1,000 of that was also on car accident excesses. Now, the quarterly report does not include their pensions or the cost of staff they are also entitled to, but it is understood Paul Keating and Tony Abbott get pensions of about $300,000 a year, John Howard $345,000, and apparently, according to reports, Rudd's and Gillard's could be about $200,000 a year each. Now, a lot of that is to do with how long they were in power. You might remember Rudd years where, one was in power for a few months, then the other one. So that's why those pensions are different.
And the staggering amount people are spending on hens parties has been revealed in new research. According to the IHG Hotel study, the average woman is forking out more than $1,600 per pre-wedding event.
Yeah, wow, that's quite a hefty sum. And once upon a time, I think back to like the first hens party I went to, it was your mates at the local pub. Maybe you'd shell out and go into the city and go to the club. And it was a dodgy apron from the $2 shop and a sash, and that was it. And you'd go out and you'd have a night out on the town. It's so different now. Many people are putting on multi-day events that require cash for travel, accommodation, activities, food and booze. Look, I've been to a hens like this. It's a lot of fun. but it costs a bloody bomb.
Oh, yeah. I don't think I've been to a bucks party in the last few years that wasn't a weekend ordeal, and it was like hours away as well.
Well, that's what I was going to say, is that this is a hens party study, which I don't think is fair, because you often come in and go, oh, I'm off to my bucks this weekend. Yes, we've dropped thousands of dollars on a house on the coast, and we're doing X, Y, and Z.
Yes.
So I think this unfairly targets women as being, silly, frivolous spenders.
Oh, absolutely.
You blokes are doing it too.
We are, and we're doing it in excess and way too often, way too often. Anyway, we want to hear from you listening. What is the most you've ever spent at a hens party or a bucks weekend? We're going to pop a prompt up to that in our broadcast channel on Instagram at The Briefing Podcast.
Yeah, and also I want to hear if anyone's done anything like particularly extravagant that you've been asked to. The article I was reading was talking about a bride who had she had 10 bridesmaids, she had a 10-day hens party, and each bridesmaid had to plan a day for this hens extravaganza. So what have you been asked to do as well? Because some of the requests are outrageous.
Now, look, that is it for our headlines for today. Coming up next is Helen Smith's deep dive looking into the state of democracy and why two key groups in Australia just don't believe in it anymore. Stick around, that deep dive is coming up for you next.
How much do you trust our government and the institutions around it? If you're a young person or living outside of the major cities here in Australia, chances are it's not a lot. That is one of the key findings of new research by independent organisation McKinnon, which surveyed 4,000 Australians on how they feel about the state of our democracy. So what exactly is driving this trend of distrust in our long-standing institutions? And what would it take for our government to re-earn their trust? Jay Weatherill is Australia's newly appointed High Commissioner to the UK, a former Premier of South Australia and the Executive Director of Democracy at McKinnon, and he joins me now. Jay, why are young people and regional Aussies losing confidence in democratic institutions?
Well, I think it's worth saying at the outset is that there's still a majority of people that support, our democracy, and they think it's the best system. And it's just that there's a variance between that and the broader Australian community. So you have to ask yourself what's going on in the regions, which makes it different. I suppose to some degree there's a proximity. I mean, you're a long way away from the centres of authority, so there's always that sense that they're removed from you. And, you also need to look at the current contemporary political configuration. So country people, by and large, tend to vote Conservative. It's a progressive government, so they'll tend to have a lower level of satisfaction because their team isn't running the place. But I think there's something deeper there, and I think it's got to do with service delivery. So what we know is that when governments are delivering for people, then trust and satisfaction with democracy goes up. We saw that during COVID when it looked like the community was keeping everybody safe and alive and looking after their interests with, financially, but also, medically with, vaccines and the things, trust improved. Of course, when it returns to normal programming and people begin to see the things that aren't working well, then that lack of trust manifests itself.
What are some other factors that this group has said is driving their distrust?
Well, they do talk about not feeling represented, or people that are in government don't represent them or look like them or understand them. They also report, a lack of information and not being involved in the decisions that affect their lives. There's a bit of a story here, I think, in regional Australia around media, like the stripping out of regional media has been a real issue in regional Australia. So you're not getting local stories talked about by local people, about local people. A lot of the news for economic reasons has sort of been concentrated in the big capital cities. So it's a business model which is about clicks. It's not really about serving up journalism to promote democratic dialogue and debate. So we're seeing a lot of forces which have now the cities have managed to survive. So most of the mainstream papers and TVs have managed to survive and radios have managed to survive in the cities, but they've really been stripped out in the regions. So because the business model, when it's come under pressure, they've sacrificed the smaller markets. As bad as that's been, it looks like it's going to go through another new phase, which is the advent of AI, where least at the moment, they do send you back to the news website, but pretty soon they'll be able to scrape all the news off the internet and ingest it, and then present it as sort of news without even having to go back to the original source website. So there's real anxieties about the future of journalism in the bush. Once again, people are feeling alienated from the political process because their issues aren't being discussed. And you see a really strong correlation between people that actually consume the news and their trust in democracy. So if they are actually looking at mainstream news, that typically their trust in democracy is higher.
Now, the report highlighted that young men in rural and remote areas have some of the lowest confidence in elections or election results that we might see, while young women in regional areas are overrepresented in not understanding how democracy works. Why are we seeing that with those groups?
And these tend to be groups which don't tune into mainstream media. Gone are the days where we used to crowd around the TV set at 6 p.m. and watch the evening news, and people would consume public affairs as part of a family. That's all broken up now. A lot of people are getting their news from devices. And there's sort of a paradox with devices. People love them and they use them and they get information from them, but they also distrust them. So it's actually not a great place for there to be a dialogue and a debate about public policy issues. People feel, and objectively I think it's got to be true, that you're getting funneled with one point of view depending on what the algorithm serves back to you. So you can become quite polarised. And that polarisation of views is feeding into a distrust in the democratic system, which is a worry, especially because it's overrepresented in young people.
Now, this might seem like a problem for regional Australia, but why should people in major cities care about the drop in democratic confidence outside of the capitals?
They're not immune. It also is happening in the cities. It's just not as extreme. In a sense, even the mainstream media in the cities is in the shrinking billabong of customers, and they're having to become more extreme, if you like, to get eyeballs on their content. So it actually is polarising the debate, making the debate more sensational in the cities as well. And of course, as they come under pressure, they've had to fire a bunch of journalists, so there's just fewer and fewer time and effort for quality journalism. But I think the answer to your question is really it's about democracy. If you want a strong democracy, you really do have to make sure it's robust across the whole country. We don't want people in the regions becoming so disconnected that they feel that they don't have a stake in the system. And that really can drive, at the margins, can drive some pretty, unfortunately, extreme behaviour. If you don't think you've got a stake in the system, then you start hearing talk of violence. Is democracy actually meeting my needs? What am I prepared to do to have my voice heard? And that can drive some people, not everyone, it's only a small minority. You only need a few people to adopt these pretty extreme views. And a lot of them are being sent down some pretty weird rabbit holes with these conspiracy theories which lurk in the dark places on the web, where there's no countervailing information to be able to challenge these narratives. I think the good news about Australia is we're not there yet. People still believe that our democracy can solve the major challenges that face it. But you don't want to end up like the US or the UK, where there are really significant challenges to democracy. I think we still have something to be proud of here, but it's urgent work to keep renewing democracy. And the work of democracy is never finished. It's not just a set and forget. We've got to keep renewing it. Let's not take it for granted.
So in practice, what does that look like?
Fundamentally, I think it's about a dialogue between all sections of society about how the system works. Like, instead of us all getting in our corners and throwing rocks at each other, like we say politicians are just self-interested and power-hungry, public servants are just lazy, the media is just sensationalist, the experts are in their RV towers, the communities, doesn't know what's in their own best interest because they just don't understand. Like, you can have all these negative stereotypes of everybody, or you could have a much more positive view of each other and actually realise we all have a role to play in the success of the system. That's what it means to be a citizen rather than a self-interested individual. How do I think about what's best for Australia rather than what might be best for me in my own backyard, which is ultimately going to be better for me in the long term? It's hard to say that doesn't start with leadership. Like, it really requires strong, courageous leadership. It does require courage to stand up and sometimes say things that people don't necessarily want to hear, but might be truthful. But having a place where you can have a truthful dialogue is really important. Where is the public square now? It's certainly not in social media.
So what can be done right now, in your opinion, to strengthen democratic institutions?
I think a bunch of things. I think we need to look at people's understanding of the system, starting with young people. I think we need to look at the public service and make sure it's truly impartial, acting in people's interests. I think we need to see that politicians are talking about policy rather than negative attack ads. I think we want politicians focusing on their job rather than their next job when they leave politics. And I think we need to look at rebuilding journalism so that we can have these conversations. And finally, we've got to really get some law and order into the tech platforms to make sure they're not spreading misinformation, especially some of these weird conspiracy theories that are taking people into some really dark places.
Jay, thank you so much for joining us on The Briefing.
Pleasure. Thank you.
That was Jay Weatherill, Australia's newly appointed High Commissioner to the UK and the Executive Director of Democracy at McKinnon, speaking with me there. Thanks for listening to this episode of The Briefing. That's it for now, but before you go, we'd love it if you could follow or subscribe wherever you're listening to. It's a really easy way you can support everything we do here at The Briefing. And you can check us out on Instagram at The Briefing Podcast. I'm Helen Smith. Catch you next time.